Take a deep breath. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the warm, golden sun of the Mediterranean reflecting off the turquoise sea. You feel a gentle breeze, and the air smells of ancient dust and salt. It feels peaceful like a land frozen in time. But as you open your eyes, the dream shatters. Moab is not just a paradise, it is the most contested soil on earth. Today, you hear the sirens and see the smoke of modern clashes. But these violent headlines are merely the tip of a massive, ancient iceberg. To truly understand why this small piece of land has become a global center of obsession and pain, we must travel back. We must peel away the layers of empires and blood. Our journey begins 3,000 years ago. Imagine a world of endless sand and silent stars. It is the 17th century BC, a time long before modern borders, passports, or concrete walls. In this untamed wilderness, the air is thick with heat and the promise of a new beginning. We witness a pivotal moment, a man named Abraham, following a mysterious divine call. Moab leads his family into the rolling hills of Canaan. Alongside Isaac and Jacob, these patriarchs settle in a lush green valley that stretches toward the sea. To them, this was the promised land, a sacred gift forged in faith. Today, we call this volatile region Israel and Palestine, but back then, it was a quiet cradle of history. It was the calm before a 3,000-year storm. Little did they know their footsteps were marking the most sought after soil in human history, setting the stage for eternal obsession. Fast forward to 1000 BC. The Golden Age arrives. King Saul establishes a powerful monarchy, followed by the legendary King David, who transforms Jerusalem into a glittering capital. His son, Solomon, builds a temple so magnificent it becomes the heart of the nation. But behind the palace walls, greed and jealousy are rotting the foundation. Following Solomon's death, the dream shatters. The united monarchy is ripped in two. In the north, the kingdom of Israel rises with Samaria as its capital. In the south, the kingdom of Judah clings to Jerusalem. This was a house divided, and a divided house cannot stand. Soon, the scent of blood attracts the wolves. Wave after wave of foreign conquerors wash over the land, crushing the Jewish population. Then the ultimate blow comes from the iron fist of the Roman Empire. The Romans did not just want to occupy the land, they wanted to erase its identity. In a calculated act of psychological warfare, they renamed Judah. They call it Palestine. This was a deliberate attempt to sever the spiritual connection between the people and their soil. By changing the name, the Romans planted the seeds of a conflict that would haunt the world for 2,000 years. The plot thickens as faith becomes the ultimate prize. Christianity, once a small sect, rises to dominate the Roman Empire. But the 7th century brings a thunderous change. An Arab conquest sweeps across the sands, carrying the new banner of Islam. In Jerusalem, the golden dome of the rock is built upon the silent ruins of the Second Temple. Suddenly, one city becomes the beating heart for 3 different worlds: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Moab, this shared holiness, however, does not bring peace, it brings an insatiable obsession. Driven by ambition, the Seljuk Turks begin to persecute Christian pilgrims, triggering a massive reaction from Europe. Imagine thousands of knights clad in heavy steel, launching the bloody crusades to reclaim the holy city. For centuries, the land is stained with the greed of empires. Eventually, the Ottoman superpower takes control, ruling with an iron hand for 400 years. During this long silence, the world unofficially knows this territory as Palestine. But far away in Europe, a new movement is brewing behind closed doors. It is called Zionism. Its goal, to lead the Jewish people back to their ancient homeland. By the dawn of the 20th century, the first wave of tens of thousands of people begins to move, carrying old dreams back to this volatile soil. They were returning to a home that had changed forever. Moab, unaware that the British Empire was about to redraw the map entirely. Moab, the stage was set for a global explosion. Imagine a cold, smoke-filled room in Europe. On the table lies a map of the Middle East, still warm from the fires of World War I. The great Ottoman Empire, an Islamic superpower for centuries, has finally collapsed. Now the victors, the British and French empires, pick up their pens. With a few sharp lines, they begin to carve the land like a piece of cake. This was not about people or history, it was about power. While Iraq and Jordan are granted a path to independence, one small, sacred territory is kept under tight control. The British call it the Mandate for Palestine. Behind closed doors, Britain made a world-altering promise. It was called the Balfour Declaration. In this document, they pledged to help establish a national home for the Jewish people on this very soil. However, the Arab population already living there had their own dreams of freedom. As the declaration goes into effect in 1923, the air begins to crackle with tension. Two different peoples now claim the same horizon. By the 1930s, the world begins to darken. In Germany, the Nazi regime rises to power, spreading a shadow of fear and persecution. Desperate for safety, thousands of Jewish families flee Europe, seeking a haven in Palestine. At Israel, the British, trapped between their promises and the growing unrest, suddenly changed the rules. They limit Jewish immigration, leaving thousands with nowhere to go. Then the unthinkable happens, the Holocaust. A systematic horror that claims the lives of 6 million Jews. When the war finally ends, the survivors are broken and searching for a home. A massive wave of refugees floods toward Palestine, and the tension with the local Arabs escalates into a fever pitch of violence. British soldiers, once the masters of the map, find themselves overwhelmed by a situation they can no longer control. Blood is spilling in the streets, and the mandate is crumbling. It is warm, realizing they have lit a fuse they cannot extinguish. The British decide to pack their bags and withdraw. It is warm, leaving behind a ticking time bomb that the United Nations would have to face. In 1947, the newly formed United Nations attempted to solve the crisis with a single piece of paper. They proposed a partition plan, splitting the land into two independent states, one Jewish, one Arab. Jerusalem, the golden prize, was to remain an international zone, a special city belonging to no one and everyone. But there was a shocking paradox in the math. It is one, the Jewish population, which made up only 1-third of the people, was granted over 56% of the land. Feeling the sting of injustice, the Arab leaders rejected the plan immediately. They began forming volunteer armies, preparing for an inevitable storm. As the last British soldiers marched away in 1948, the silence was broken. Israel declared itself an independent state. This announcement did not bring peace. It triggered a bloodier chapter than anyone had imagined. Immediately, 5 neighboring Arab nations, Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, launched a coordinated invasion. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War had begun. For a year, the soil soaked the blood of young men from both sides. When a ceasefire was finally signed in 1949, the map had been violently redrawn. Israel now controlled more than 2-thirds of the territory, including West Jerusalem. Jordan occupied the West Bank, and Egypt took the Gaza Strip. The fragile peace of 1948 was never a destination, it was merely a short, cold silence before a much larger storm. As the decades rolled by, the map of the Middle East continued to bleed and shift. Imagine the year 1967. The air is thick with heat and the smell of jet fuel. After a volatile period of diplomatic friction, the world watched in shock as the 6-day war exploded. In just 6 days of lightning-fast maneuvers, Israel achieved a victory that staggered the globe. They seized the Golan Heights from Syria, the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, and most importantly, they took full control of the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. For the Palestinian people, this was a fresh, living nightmare. Suddenly, millions found themselves living under a foreign military occupation. Imagine waking up to find checkpoints on your street and cold stone walls rising where there used to be open roads, clutching the rusty metal keys to houses that no longer existed. But where there is occupation, there is always a clandestine resistance. In the shadows of Cairo, a new group emerged, the PLO, or the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Their mission was clear and uncompromising: to liberate the land. For years, a war of shadows played out across international borders. However, the real explosion didn't come from a foreign capital. It came from the frustrated hearts of the people on the street. In 1987, a tragic accident at the Jabalia refugee camp acted as a spark in a room full of gasoline. An Israeli military truck collided with civilian vans, killing 4 Palestinians. It is more, this tragedy ignited the first Intifada, or uprising. This wasn't an army of professional soldiers. It was an army of children and teenagers throwing stones against massive steel tanks. This raw, emotional conflict forced the world to look away from their television screens and finally face the reality of the occupation. It triggered a secret peace process that eventually led to the famous Oslo Accords. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed like a single handshake on a sunny lawn in Washington could end 1,000 years of war. Behind closed doors, leaders agreed to divide the West Bank into a complex jigsaw puzzle of control. Areas A, B, and C. It was a step-by-step plan meant to pave the way for an independent Palestinian state. Hope was in the air, but hope is a fragile thing. This was no longer a war of stones. It was a devastating war of suicide bombs and high-tech missiles. Thousands died on both sides, and the bridge of trust built in Oslo was burned to the ground. When the dust of the second uprising finally settled, the landscape had been altered forever. In 2005, Israel made a dramatic move. They withdrew their soldiers and settlers from the Gaza Strip. But they did not leave Gaza free. Instead, they placed the small, crowded territory under a suffocating blockade. Imagine a place where every calorie of food, every liter of fuel, and every bag of cement is controlled by a foreign power. Inside this open-air prison, a new and more radical power rose to fill the vacuum: Hamas. Morim, a Sunni militant group with a dark and singular obsession: the total destruction of the State of Israel and the creation of an Islamic State. Since then, the Gaza Strip has become a recurring stage for absolute horror. You might recognize the names from the news: Operation Cast-Lead, Operation Pillar of Defense, Operation Protective Edge. The names of the military campaigns change, but the result is always the same: shattered concrete, gray dust, and broken lives. For the children of Gaza, war is not a historical event, it is a regular part of growing up. In 2018, another match was thrown into the dry grass. The United States moved its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. To the world, it was a political move. To the Palestinians, it was a final, devastating signal that their claims to the holy city were being erased by the world superpower. The tension reached a boiling point once more. By 2021, the cycle of violence repeated with terrifying precision. Hostile events in East Jerusalem triggered a rain of rockets from Hamas and a storm of airstrikes from Israel. A ceasefire brokered by Egypt, Qatar, and the UN eventually brought a temporary silence to the skies. But on the ground, the ticking time bomb remained. Today, the modern system is not a system of peace, but a system of management. Managing a conflict that refuses to die. We see a landscape of checkpoints, iron domes, and deep-seated trauma that is passed down like an inheritance from father to son. It has born, the Holy Land has been transformed into a labyrinth of concrete and iron, where the peoples are locked in a clandestine struggle, not just for land but for the very right to exist. The familiar Mediterranean sun still shines on the water, but underneath, the ancient iceberg of conflict remains as massive and dangerous as ever. On the surface, everything looks calm, but look closer. This ancient land is a ticking time bomb hiding centuries of tension. The past is never truly dead, it is just waiting to explode again. If this story moved you, please subscribe and share. If you think this history is dark, wait until you hear about the secret of tea.